SABC, host broadcaster of the G20 South Africa 2025.
South Africa's G20 presidency is driving global momentum towards a more inclusive, equitable and sustainable future. Minister of International Relations and Cooperation Ronald Lamola, flanked by Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi and Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana, addressed the media today on the country's commitment to hosting the G20 Leaders Summit. Lamola confirmed that the United States will not attend the event, but emphasized that South Africa's participation in the G20 is focused on shaping global affairs and advancing Africa's developmental agenda. He said the summit represents a critical opportunity to strengthen partnerships and ensure Africa's voice is heard on the world stage.
Preparations for the summit are on track, with numerous heads of states and governments from the G20 member countries, including invited guest countries, have been confirmed for participation. Heads of international organizations, in total 42 countries, are confirmed for participation at various levels. This includes 20 G20 members, excluding the United States, for reasons well known to you. 16 guest countries and 6 countries representing regional economic communities in Africa, the Caribbean, and East Africa. The Leaders Summit will take place from the 22nd to the 23rd November 2025. The agenda of the summit will be anchored on the following 3 sessions, namely, Session 1, Inclusive and Sustainable Economic Growth, Leaving No One Behind. Building our economies, the role of trade, financing for development, and the debt burden. Session 2, A Resilient World, the G20's contributions, disaster risk reduction, climate change, just energy transition, food systems. And Session 3, A Fair and a Just Future for all critical minerals, decent work, and artificial intelligence. It is also expected that before taking actions on the South African Leaders Declaration, Summit will take note or adopt the following reports commissioned by our G20 presidents: the Africa Expert Panel, the Extraordinary Committee of Independent Experts on the Global Wealth Inequality, the G20 and G20 Review. High-level sides events, including the IPSA Leaders Meeting, the Global Fund Aid Replenishment Meeting, the High-Level Renewable Energy Pledging Event, a Compact with Africa event, a Disaster Risk Reduction Meeting, a meeting with Africa Heads of State, and special South Africa-EU Summit are set to take place on the margins of the Leaders Summit.
Now, Minister Ronald Lamola says South Africa is on track to host world leaders for the G20 Leaders Summit this weekend. For more on the G20 Summit, I'm joined in studio by SABC News Specialist Correspondent Sophie Mokoena. Good afternoon, Sophie. Thank you very much for joining us. Quite a lot coming out of that briefing, but essentially, Minister Lamola coming out quite confident that they're ready to host a world-class summit with 130 G20 official meetings out of the 133 already having taken place. Just take us through the salient points of that briefing.
Well, I think what is important is South Africa emphasizing the fact that the summit will go ahead. But secondly, him divulging information that as we speak, the Sherpa meeting is continuing. This is where the declaration is being discussed and member states are fighting for their interest in terms of ensuring that the declaration of the Johannesburg summit does capture the interest of their respective countries. I think that is the most important work that's underway as we speak. It doesn't happen in front of cameras, it happens behind closed doors. As we speak, the Director General of the Department of International Relations and other officials of government are there fighting for interest of South Africa and by extension interest of Africa and interest of the developing South, with other members supporting South Africa's position, finalizing and adopting the content as they relate to the South African theme. And therefore, that's where the work is done. On Saturday, yes, it's a show of heads of states who will be there, which is more ceremonial signing of that declaration. But the declaration will be discussed this week. They may agree on a declaration or a communique, or they may not. But there's a glimmer of hope, because when you look at the work that was done in the finance stream, we will realize that in Durban, they were able to adopt a declaration on issues that are related to the task force. And therefore, there's progress. And that's what he said today, basically, of course, responding to other issues that are not related to the summit, but have bearing to the summit, like the arrival of the Palestinians in South Africa, and the finance minister trying to educate us in terms of you always have these different heated arguments and views at any G20 summit.
Now that you touch on that statement by the finance minister, because it actually was prompted by the first statement by Ronald Lamola when he went on to remind everyone of the precarious period geopolitically under which South Africa assumed this presidency, and then the finance minister going there to quickly remind everyone that the G20 president, Sophie, has always been assumed ever so often in the midst of upheaval, reminding us of that Russia annexation of Crimea back in 2014, where one country, Australia, I believe it was, had wanted Russia to be banned, but quickly being reminded by the G20 members that collectively they are custodians of the G20. It cannot be just one country that proposes the banning of another.
Yes, you are correct. You can't ban a member state. It's a voluntary organization. You don't get invited. South Africa is a founding member of the G20, 2007, when it was still a forum of ministers and central bank governors. It was escalated or elevated to heads of state and government level because of the geopolitics, because they found out that at times when these finance ministers and central bank governors are talking about the economic issues, then the geopolitical matter comes in, and therefore bring in the president so that they can deal with such issues. And therefore the foreign affairs became an office where you deal with these issues, taking inputs from heads of state and government. And in Russia, in St. Petersburg, at the G20 Summit, United States of America, the president at that time was Barack Obama, and the president of Russia at that time, the host country, was Dmitry Medvedev, a very, very radical person. America wanted to bring the issue of America's quest to invade Syria or attack Syria to the G20 discussions. Member states refused to say, the G20 cannot substitute, it's not a substitute to the UN, and all where peace and security is being discussed at the peace and security of the UN, you know, and therefore this matter belongs there, it doesn't belong here. So there's always been that challenge. Recently, the last past G20 meetings have been very difficult because of the war in Ukraine, and they couldn't even adopt a declaration or communique. It was statements from host countries. And this time around, it's continuing under very difficult geopolitics. You look at the war in Ukraine, it's still raging on. You look at the situation in the Middle East, even on the continent, Sudan and DRC. And these big countries that are member states of the G20 have interest in these conflicts. And therefore, this can sometimes derail the summit. You have, at the moment, a United States of America, the powerful country that's supposed to take a lead in bringing countries together, found wanting. And therefore, that's it. And as I made an example, in St. Petersburg, America wanted to attack Syria. They brought the matter or tried to sneak in the matter because the UN at the Security Council, there was no resolution given to America to invade Syria. Now they wanted to sneak it in via G20. That was dismissed. So there's always that kind of a thing.
I suppose this context is quite important, Sophie, because it puts to bed any fears by some that perhaps when the US now assumes its presidency, possibly it could move to want to ban South Africa. Just hearing from what you've stated now, the countries are quite strong and vocal. There would be no such. They cannot just simply unilaterally opt to ban South Africa from attending the G20 in the United States.
Well, I think the only way to do it is refusing South African delegation when you have these preparatory meetings, visas, and they can't enter the US. And it's up, that's the US, their laws will apply. They can also not grant permission for President Ramaphosa's plane to land, or the rumors that we hear, that I got to know about, that there's a push to kind of sanction some of the senior government officials who are ANC members, and they made by America. The intention is to ensure that they don't attend the G20. Otherwise, there's no other way, but they will just miss the US meeting. Next, it's the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom has been supportive. South Africa will be back there participating fully. So whatever the US is doing next year doesn't mean that the role and the seat of South Africa on the table will diminish, not at all.
Sophie, as always, thank you very much for joining us on Point. That's SABC News Specialist Correspondent Sophie Mokoena. They're speaking to us post that briefing by the International Relations Minister Ronald Lamola, as well as Finance Minister Inoko Dongwana, just giving us a sense of their state of readiness and quite confident that in 5 days they will host international leaders.